Welcome, everybody. This is episode 3 of our series on Mr. Mauck's book, Paul on Trial, the Book of Acts as a Defense of Christianity. But anyone could jump in at this point. This is a very universal episode that will be shocking at the same time. So we're going to ask, why does Mauck, who wrote this book, Paul on Trial, miss two key proofs of his thesis? What's his thesis? For those who you have not been here in the first 2 episodes, his thesis is very simple. It's that the book of Luke and the book of Acts, in the first verse of each book, are clearly reflecting that it's a combined book, and they're both addressed to Most Excellent Theophilus. And this label or form of address is used for addressing government officials. So if you're going to address a magistrate, you would say, Most Excellent Theophilus. That at the time that this is being written, we know is at the very end of the book of Acts. Obviously, he's writing it at that time, and he's in Rome, and he's going to deliver the book of Acts in particular for purposes of a trial to Theophilus, who's obviously at Rome. So the reason they're in Rome is Paul was put on trial before the Sanhedrin, and then he went to Festus Agrippa, and Agrippa was trying to hear his case, and then in the middle of this case, Paul says, "I appeal to Caesar." So, not Agrippa. Yes, I guess it was Agrippa and Festus. So anyway, the point is that now Paul has to go to an appeal, and he appeals to Caesar. Well, Caesar is the generic name of the office of emperor or sole ruler after the empire began, and that was Nero. So his appeal would be heard before Nero, not a really nice guy. So the church's legitimacy was completely dependent upon this trial going well, because if Paul were convicted of disrupting the Jewish religion or being an illicit religion, meaning Christianity is a divergence from the protected religion of Judaism, we would be outlawed. So all of Christianity was hanging in the balance, and that's why Luke was writing both the Gospel and the book of Acts. And also independently, there's theories from Evans. Professor Evans wrote a book called The Synoptic Tradition and the Hebrew Matthew, and he makes a good case that Luke translated the Gospel of Matthew from its Hebrew original into Greek. And that's why it has so many similarities to the quotations of the Hebrew Matthew that are in the early church. So the early church treated the Hebrew Matthew as the original, and this was kept in a library in Caesarea. And this is even where Jerome, centuries later, would find the Hebrew Matthew and himself make multiple translations in Greek and Latin from Hebrew. But for reasons that I won't go into, those two translations have disappeared. So anyway, the point is that's what this is all about. And now the proof that Mauck is marshaling or is going to marshal depends upon proving that the purpose of the book of Acts is as a trial brief to win the case and disprove all the charges against Paul. And they stem from his visit to the temple. And when he goes to the temple, his friend Trophimus violates the middle wall of separation. He's an uncircumcised Gentile from Ephesus. He is arrested along with Trophimus, and then they charge Paul and they accuse him of bringing Trophimus into the temple. And Paul's alibi at the time was, I was doing a ceremonial bath when Trophimus did that, so I could not be responsible. And then, generally speaking, Paul went through a couple of hearings, and then they were trying to find out, the authorities didn't know why the Jewish groups of people were so agitated, and they were trying to find out what's this charge. They couldn't even get the charge. Paul didn't ever explain to them why they had, the people got so upset and were angry. And so the Sanhedrin actually holds a hearing, and they don't even know what happened. And they're trying to find out from Paul, can you tell us what happened? And Paul says, I'm on trial because I'm a Pharisee and I believe in the eternal life. And then they got involved in a whole debate. So he derailed anybody finding out what was going on. But at that point, the Roman authorities grabbed Paul, put him in jail to protect him from the Jewish rabble that were wanting to kill him, who knew what the charge was all about. and then ultimately that leads to the appeal. So the point is, this is if the book of Acts is intended for Roman officials reviewing this, what would be the best proof that that is true? It would be if there's something in the book of Acts that Luke would never have ever intended Christians to read positively about Paul. So we're all told this is a book completely positive about Paul. In fact, it makes him a hero. And but if you do not know what certain passages are about, you would conclude that. But once you know what they are, you go, this was never intended for Christians, because this is so clearly only intended for pagans. Because if Christians knew what was being referred to here, they would be offended that they couldn't believe that this could be ascribed to the Lord Jesus. And you'll notice what I'm going to show you is Luke doesn't ascribe these things to Jesus that are so offensive. It's something that happens physically, actually happens in front of him, and he eyewitnesses. And so he can verify. And that's why he recounts it. And they're helpful in front of a pagan court, but they would never be persuasive in front of Christians. They would be repulsive. So let's go through that. So the title of this is called, Why Does Mauck, the author of this book, Paul on Trial, miss the two proofs of his thesis, the best two proofs, I mean, conclusive proofs, the Python priestess in Acts 16 and the kick against the pricks quotation of the supposed Jesus in Acts 26, verse 14. If these were understood, and that's the point, is we have been given the Bible in a form that we can't understand what's happening, so we don't see how offensive these are to us as Christians. It would repel Christians, but it would be extremely attractive to pagans to see that these two things are true, and that Paul experienced them, and so that they would be positive for Paul, but only to pagans, but wholly deleterious for Christians to know these things are true. So Luke knows these things are true. Luke knows these events happened. He's not saying he thinks these events point well for Paul, not at all. But he knows they happened, and they will help win this trial. And everything hangs in the balance. What hangs in the balance for Luke is what? Everything, the whole Christian faith. This isn't all about Paul. This is the entire Christian faith could be outlawed if this appeal does not go well. All right. So in the book of Acts is a passage called Acts 16, verse 16. And in there is a reference to a python. But you would not know that most of the time. Two of the, so if you go to BibleHub.com, they give you 23, 24 Bible passages. And of the 23, only two actually give you the word that's there in the book, which should have just simply not been changed in any way. It is a title. It is an office. It is a famous figure in history for hundreds and hundreds of years in pagan religion, who this person is. And it's an office, and it is so persuasive that all Europeans, all pagan Europeans would, whatever this lady says, you would listen to her. And so anyway, it's in Young's Literal and Literal Standard. It's the word python. And so let me just see something here. So this is how this verse translates. And it came to pass in our going on to prayer, a certain maid having the spirit of Python did meet us, who brought much employment to her masters by soothsaying. And the literal standard is the same. So notice it's just a maid. It isn't a slave. As we'll see, that's another problem of how this verse was translated. And it translates, just says what it is. It's the python, has the spirit of the python. Not don't give me some other word that I can't, that disguises this and hides this from me. Let me know what it is, and then let's look it up and we'll figure it out. So, but a Roman person, a Roman official would know immediately who this is. This is the python. This is a python priestess from the sister city of Philippi that had its own pythons, because the Philip of Macedon himself co-opted the Delphic oracle from Delphi to serve his purposes, and so there was these python priestesses operating in Philippi at this time. And notice Luke is present. He's saying it came to pass a certain man having the spirit of Python met us. So he's there. This is when he first shows up in the book of Acts. So he's not been there anywhere between Acts 1 and Acts 16, verse 16. We'll get into that later. So now, who exactly is this Python priestess? And I think this is important that we know. She would sit on this. See this serpent's column here? She would get up high on this column, and she'd sit on that, and she would give prophecies. And this is in Plato's book Phaedrus. And I found this just today, so to me this is important. I was not sure. I thought maybe she couldn't possibly sit there up on that tall pillar, but actually Plato says that's part of the shock when you see her, to see how she's sitting on this precarious high spot. So let me just read this to you. So this is a 5th century BC, then 400s. Plato defined this, and the woman's name, the priestess, is often called Pythia for short. He says in the same passage from Phaedrus, she raved while pronouncing Apollo's oracles from the tripod. So Apollo is the god of the sun. And remember Constantine, if you follow our other series on Constantine, he's created this, he's brought the serpent pillar that you see there on the right to Constantinople. He's resetting up the Delphic Oracle now inside of Constantinople. He's doing this in 324 AD, months before, no more than a year, obviously, before the June 325 AD Nicene Conference, where Constantine makes the final decision that we will treat Jesus as the same substance as the Father. They're both eternal. They're both God. And that's it. So we get this decision that makes Jesus identical to the god Dionysius, if you want to look at it that way. We're going to see that's a possibility, or the god of Apollo. And anyway, and it said, and then Plato goes on. He says, although one would have thought that any violent activity might have been dangerous on that high perch. So she's convulsing while she's up there, and you would think that she would be dangerous for her, that she doesn't fall down, but she never didn't. And then it shows in 5th century vases, it shows her sitting calmly on the tripod, obviously in this high perch, and so she is. And the reason I was thinking otherwise is there's a drawing by a German, Ludemann does I think it's Ludemann or Ludman. He does a painting or a drawing of her looking like she's sitting on a low object. And that's how she's doing it. No, she's on top of a perch. And this is where she is. She's on top of that serpent column doing her thing. Okay, and this is the passage that I believe that the Roman magistrates would have been very impressed with, but Christians would have to be repulsed by. Acts 16, verse 16 to 17. And it came to pass in our going on to prayer, a certain maid having a spirit of Python did meet us, who brought much employment to her masters by soothsaying. She, having followed Paul and us, was crying, saying, these men are servants of the Most High God, who declare to us a way of salvation. So this means that she is saying that Paul is serving the Most High God, which in her religion, she's not, she's going to have a demon thrown out of her. So she's not saying this is servants of Yahweh. She's saying this is servant of our God, Apollo, and they declare to us a way of salvation, not the way of salvation. So this is not a gospel of Jesus Christ. This is a gospel of the god Apollo. And so while she's under influence of demons, she's not trying to promote Jesus. She's trying to promote Paul in particular, because he's the main speaker in each of these towns that they go to. Okay, so ultimately, though, Paul gets annoyed by this attention. She kept this up for many days. Finally, Paul became so annoyed that he turned around and said to the spirit, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her. At that moment, the spirit left her. Now, from a pagan ruler like Nero's perspective, this is no big deal. To have a demon come and go out of your body is no big deal, because that's normal for their religion, the pagan religions. So you would be even happy. The demonia were known as good and bad, sort of like sprites or like fairies almost. They were powerful and they could come in your body and dwell with you and then leave and so on. So no big deal to Nero. Oh, he cast them out. No big deal. But we know that's not how it really works with demons, but that's how pagans viewed it. So this fact that he cast her out doesn't mean he's anti the Python priestess. He's just, messing with her a little bit to make her stop annoying him. Just stop talking to me, like that kind of thing. Stop her spirit of bothering me. So the Romans wouldn't have negatively reacted to this, but Christians would be completely like, what? What, Paul is being endorsed by the Python Priestess, is most famous person of all Europe, who could make empires rise and fall, and picked out the city of Byzantium where people would move from one part of Greece to another part of Greece. I mean, that was in the last episode too. I mean, she's influential, and the one in Philippi is just a sister station from the one in Delphi. So this is crucial stuff. This is very important stuff. Anyway, and we've already gone over that. Okay, so now, what Mauck didn't experience was what it meant to see that word Python. And why didn't he see it? Because it's hidden. It's hidden away. 2 out of 23 reveal that it's Python. There is absolutely no reason not to translate this directly, right, from one language to the other. It's sort of like saying, did you meet the god Dionysius talking to you? Let's say that was the issue. Would you say, would you translate that as, did you meet the Son of God? Because Dionysius is a type of son of God. So this is why they changed it, that she was a young maiden who spoke divination. What happened to her character? What happened to this person? She's a famous character of history, and you're not telling people who she is. They're all nameless, in meaning we don't know any of their personal names. That's part of the mystery of the Delphic Oracle. They all had different names individually, but they gave up their identity, as we'll see, to serve this role. So let's go a little deeper into this, so we know why this should be offensive to us, but really super positive to the Nero and the magistrate helping. Okay, so this is Christopher Wordsworth, a Doctor of Divinity, Canon of Westminster, so he held a high position at the time. This is 1862. He writes, in the New Testament of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, in the original Greek, he explains that this label of Python that applied to the scroll represented something significant. So I don't know what Bible he's looking at, because in the King James it's missing, but he must have been looking at the Greek, right? So we're going to see all the Greek manuscripts show Python. So he's revealing something that you cannot see, and he's revealing the significance to a reader of that era at the time that it was written by Luke would have seen. And then tell me if you think a Christian would have responded ambivalently about what this really means, that she's endorsing his message of salvation, and he serves the Most High God that she serves before she has the demon thrown out of her. He says this, Wordsworth, a remarkable expression. The damsel was possessed by an evil spirit, Python spirit, a word never occurring in the Gospels. The word Python would sound a note strong on the Greek and Roman ear. How much was contained in those words? Python was the prophetic serpent at Delphi, the center and focus of Gentile divination. The Python gave his name and place to the prophetic deity of the Gentile world. The successor of the serpent of Delphi was the Pythian Phobos, or Apollo. And from him, all who claimed the powers of divination received their title and were called Pythons. The author provides numerous examples from Greek literature. Therefore, this damsel at Philippi with her Pythonistic possession was, according to her degree, a representative of Pythia who sat on the tripod of Delphi, and who delivered the response in the name of Pythian Apollo, the successor of the serpent. So basically, you served as the message mouthpiece of Apollo through the serpent's mouth. That's pagan stuff. And brought much gain and renown to her masters at that place, and deceived the world by her sorceries. Hence, St. Luke calls the spirit of Philippi Python. The Python was, hold on here, an agent of Satan. Okay, so he couldn't put it more bluntly, could he? And then I go on here. This is my comment in this. Predictably, this devout Christian author blinds himself to the importance that for many days his influential Python counterpart to the one at Delphi was endorsing the plan of salvation from Paul. This author simply goes on to say, by virtue of Paul casting out the demon later, that Paul teaches the Python was an unclean spirit and is denounced, and he says, denounced and ejected by St. Paul. It never dawns on this author to question the significance of Paul's delay and the interim endorsement of Paul's gospel by what this author admits is a popular and influential agent of Satan. This is a serious problem for Christians. We would just go, this can't be a person from God. And if we knew this was really written as a trial brief just for pagans, we would say, hey, you know what, this guy Paul doesn't belong in our system, our Christian system of what we want to hear from, because he's demons endorse him. and his message of salvation, and not message of Christ, the message he was preaching. That's what was being endorsed by this demon. So this was super appealing to pagans, super endorsement of him, because they think demons are great. Demons, like I told you, they have a positive and negative effect, and a demon possessing the Python priestess would be expected, because that's what she's doing. She's channeling the gods, and the demons were kind of other gods. They're not like what we think of it. Demonia, they were called in Greek literature. Demonia did not have a bad connotation like we have. Now, if we look at Mauck's book at pages 221, 223 in his summation, he's going to highlight factors that he thinks is more probable than not that the Book of Acts was a legal brief for the trial upcoming of Paul on his appeal. Okay, so it's like a mini trial going on, appeal, and so here's a couple of his proofs, and just you'll see by looking at what he's saying would have been helpful. You have to realize then the Python priestess argument has to be super helpful. So he'll say the judicial readership issue. Chapter 3 on the investigator has shown that there are numerous questions about Christian belief or behavior which a judicial readership, meaning an investigator, magistrate, or lawyer, will care about, and the answers to which would be already known by or of no interest to a Christian readership. So he's getting it. It's like there, he's just simply saying these really only have an interest to Roman officials who are investigating, and they would have little or no interest. They're already known or of no interest to Christians. So that's as close as you can get to what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's evidence here that not only would a Christian not have an interest in anything about the Python priestess, but would be repelled, would want to vote for Paul, being convicted if they were the ones in charge. So this is so he is taking it one notch down, but he doesn't know about the Python priestess because why? The translations disguise and change the word from Python into someone who speaks prophecy and all that. We're going to get into when this first happened, and we'll see who did it. In English, this is where it changed because it was in the Latin Vulgate. Okay, so paragraph 26 in his summation is the Gospel of Luke. Scores of unique details. This is his proof of why you can infer it was meant as a legal brief, meaning it was only really primarily had interest to Roman officials investigating. Scores of unique details which distinguish Luke from Mark and Matthew are consistently compatible with the hypothesis that it was written to give factual background and legal foundation for Paul's trial before Nero. So in other words, there are facts in the way Jesus is being depicted. It might be about the Roman coins, about following Roman law, and all of these things that you would basically put in there for purposes of Paul's appeal, which were not as important or even mentionable in the book of Matthew or Mark. And then he said, now here's where he gets into the Python priestess, and this is how he completely obviously misses the point. Second, the account of the deliverance of the slave girl, and see it says 45 above the word girl, see? And then I put here, this is all he has. It's just this citation to Acts 16, verse 16 to 21. So to him, that's all he knows. She's a slave girl. Doesn't know she's the Python priestess. Doesn't know she's one of the most important European. She is a representative of the most important European office, more powerful, really, than kings and rulers. If she said, depose your ruler tomorrow over here in whatever country, that people would go do this. This is what, I mean, she was used or manipulated a couple times to do those kind of things, and it worked. It worked for Philip of Macedon. So anyway, second, the account of the deliverance of the slave girl is consistent with refutation by Luke of charges that Paul was teaching or instigating insurrection or at least insubordination by slaves. Paul frees the girl from a demon, but her masters react to the deliverance with as much vehemence as if he had helped her escape, which in a way he had, but he really didn't. Nothing I have found in Roman law suggests that the Romans would see exorcism as illegal. Hence, it is plausible that Luke included the details concerning the Philippian slave girl to make clear that Paul was not teaching slaves to rebel. No, I don't think that's very plausible at all. So just so you know, this is his weakest point in all of this is the irony. This is the weakest fact he presented for his thesis, and yet it should have been the absolute killer fact that would win his entire argument in his book. So, so I would simply say this is simply liberating someone from a demon is a spiritual liberation. It is not a physical release of the her role as being a servant. And I don't. She was not a slave. Well, I think I have time to throw that in here. She's not really a slave, as we'll get into, but she's a servant of these guys, and they're making money off of her divinations and prophecies and so on. That's all that's happening. And now she doesn't have the demon spirit in her anymore, and she'll be kind of useless to them. So she'll lose her job. So that's what he's really done is he put her out of work. That's all he's done. So this doesn't have any implication about slavery or not. So it's just simply the translation as slave is made up because it's not actually the word there. She's a maid, as Young's literal has, and as the literal standard version also had. She's just a young woman, and that's it. She's not a slave. That the word there does not necessarily mean that. And the particular person, the Python priestesses, were never slaves. They were actually revered and had jobs, and they would be paid for their work. Okay. Now I want to, so I wanted to find out, well, where did he get this idea that she's a slave? Well, a lot of the translations say she's a slave, but where does this come from in terms of uh, why did people ever say that? So if he had looked at Ellicott's commentary for English readers, this is in the Bible Hub, he would have seen all the stuff I've just told you about. He would have seen, okay, she's uh, she's the python was the serpent worshipped at Delphi as a symbol of wisdom, from whom the Pythian priestesses took their name, and from whom Apollo, as succeeding to the oracular power of the serpent, took the same adjective. So this is the Pythia. In other words, Pythia or Python priestess, they're interchangeable terms. So he could have learned all this if he just looked at Bible Hub, and this is like the second column on the top. So he missed this. This was a big deal that he missed this. Too bad. And this Ellicott refers to this as an exceptional description. Seems to imply that he recognized in her phenomena identical with those of the priestess of Delphi, the wild distortions, the shrill cries, the madness of an evil inspiration. I mean, she was this person who would, basically garble and, just say all these things, and she needed a priest interpreter to then interpret what she was saying, and people paid money for all this stuff. And it goes on to the wild cries, and but then they say she was a slave, and I think it is because of the word masters, which we'll see what that was about. She was simply, let's go back and see if we can see that here. Do we have that in here? So it says masters a lot of the time, right? But you can have a girl who works for masters because the word there in Greek is kyrios. So a master doesn't mean you're a slave master. It means you're the employer. Okay. So there was no inference that one should have drawn that she was a slave, and particularly if she's a Python priestess. And I'll show you why if we have a second here. Okay, so we're going to end this first half of the episode to keep it at around 30 minutes, and then that's a morsel that is more digestible than a whole hour. And then look for part 3B. It'll have a similar title, and I'll also put a link in this episode's description that will link to the next episode in case you want to just use the description to click over to it. And all right, God bless. Hope this has so far been interesting, and we will see you in 3B. Ciao. Bye.